PGCE Research Bites, student-teacher research from the team behind Emma and Tom Talk Teaching.
Hello everyone, I have got Danielle Kates here who is going to be talking to me about her fantastic first assignment that investigated factors influencing the reading comprehension of children in primary schools. So tell me about the starting point to this, Danielle. What was the theme that was given to you by your lead partnership school? I know that you were in your clinical practice school at the time as well.
Yes, yeah.
How did you go about breaking that down and deciding, what aspect of this focus you were going to investigate?
So we started off initially with 6 quite broad topics from our lead practice school. So the one that mine sort of stemmed from was improving reading, which is obviously very broad. Then I went to my clinical practice school and spoke to my mentor, and we'd already sort of discussed some issues that we had in the class with reading in general. And we together sort of narrowed that down to reading comprehension. I did then try and sort of narrow it down a bit too much and then found it really difficult, so I had to take a step back from that almost, so that I could find enough sources and enough studies. But yeah, so then that was my final topic then was comprehension and how to improve that comprehension.
Thank you for that. And I suppose it's interesting that you said that you had the chat with your mentor and presumably you were seeing the children's struggles in the classroom as well. Can you give us any kind of indication before we get to the texts and what you found? Yeah. What kind of struggles with comprehension were you seeing in practice?
There were quite a few children in the class who were able to read very fluently. I was listening to readers every day and they were very confidently reading through quite complex texts, but then you would ask them a question, sometimes a fairly simple question about what they just read, but they weren't able to answer the question. So that was something that I had already found quite interesting and, wondered how that could happen really, because I didn't have any understanding about what comprehension entails and all the different factors that go into it. So it was really interesting for me.
So this is the kind of sweet spot here when you've been given a theme that's broad enough for you to then be able to follow a line of inquiry that is really pertinent to you and to your learners. So it's great to hear that happened for you and you were able to sort of find that line of inquiry.
Yeah.
So how did you then go about selecting your 6 sources? Because you'd only have 6 and you, if I may say so, you've been quite clever about the different types of sources that you'd use. So just tell me about your process there.
It was just, to be honest, a lot of reading, and it was finding texts that were relevant really. There were lots that were older children or adults even. There were some that were from different countries, and there were a couple that were quite similar to each other, and because comprehension is such a complex area, I wanted that the text to reflect that, all those different aspects that contribute to it.
And let's get into the nitty gritty now then, because of course you were tasked with doing all of this reading, synthesising all of that in order to make some recommendations that would benefit not only your lead partnership school but also your clinical practice school too, but by virtue of you being there as well. You started really well. You started with a meta-analysis, and for those who don't know what one of that is takes lots of different studies, doesn't it, and crunches it all down in order to identify from a much bigger research base things that work. So What did you find from that was of note?
Once I managed to sort of understand it myself, because it's very complicated and the different ways that you can do meta-analyses, it was really hard to get my head around initially. But this first one that I included was it was looking at different interventions to support reading comprehension. So there are loads of different types of interventions that you could do, but I found through that study reading strategy. So it could be skimming, scanning, things like that, all these different strategies, which is quite broad really. And background knowledge interventions were the most useful. But then if you also add another layer to that and have motivational strategies included alongside those other strategies, then that can really help to support children's comprehension when reading.
And then you had sandwiched in between an Estin thematic report some other individual sort of case studies that were really specific to a particular area of the world, groups of learners and your particular age range, and that were looking at different facets of comprehension. So can you give me a bit of a summary of what you found from those before we get to the Estin one? Because you were quite clever about where you put that, I thought.
Yeah. So the second entry that I had was looking at morphological awareness, which I've always actually really enjoyed sort of picking apart words in that way. It's, roots, suffixes, and that's something that can really support children for all abilities and then all age groups. So I'm really glad I included that when I got to sort of pick that study apart, because it's something that it affects my practice now, and it's something that I do quite regularly, do at every opportunity.
Can I ask then, just because there might be some people out there that don't really use that in their practice and might not even know what you mean by morphological awareness, and I understand, you talked about prefixes and suffixes. In practice, what are you doing when you're pre-teaching, I would imagine, some of these roots and morphemes? What are you doing, and how is that influencing comprehension?
So it's allowing the child to understand how the word can be broken up, so that they can then understand, they can use that to work out the meaning of the word. And that's it means that if they can understand the small parts of the word that make up the word, that then make up the text, then it all builds and adds to that layer of to the comprehension.
Great. And this was a real revelation for me, actually, when I was reading your assignment, because there are certain prefixes that tend to cluster around certain subjects as well. So I learned something there from a subject discipline perspective. For example, when you know that photo means light, you can unlock quite a lot of other words. So this was really revelatory for me reading your assignment. And so then we moved into some of the other studies. What else did you find? Were you noticing sort of trends across these studies?
The biggest trend, or the biggest learning from all of them combined, is that there's just so many different factors that contribute to comprehension, and there's not one thing that works the best, and there's not one thing that will work in isolation. If you're trying to help children understand what they're reading, they all work together, and some aspects will work better together. It's very complicated, but I think that if you're looking at all of these aspects and trying to incorporate them into your practice, then you're going to help the children with their reading. And
you noticed some extra strategies that are probably worth a mention. You read an interesting study about questioning techniques and sort of low and high order question techniques that you might use to dig into comprehension. What was interesting about that?
There was a question I'd done before the study, and it was asking teachers how important they think high level questioning is, and the majority of teachers said it's very important in their practice. But then what was found was that a lot of teachers weren't using high level questioning as much as they initially thought, and then because of that, those answers that the children were giving, because they weren't open questions and they were far more closed, so were the answers, and the children weren't giving the extra detail in answers about texts.
Thank you for that. And just to backtrack a little bit and pick up on something that you said with regard to the meta-analysis, which I thought was very interesting in your recommendations, a good thing to pick up on, was the fact that you need to teach strategies that sort of builds their resilience, builds their confidence alongside the comprehension strategies. Was there anything specific, or is there anything specific that you now do alongside teaching comprehension that supports that? I
definitely try and encourage the children not to, if they see a text that looks all of a sudden really complicated and too difficult for them, is to take a moment and just sort of have a breath. That's something that really makes a difference, in the same way that it does with maths. And you have children who don't feel confident in maths. They panic when they see a question that they don't instantly know how to answer, but they need to have those strategies to support them and help them calm themselves almost before answering.
And this was what was really interesting about your study, I think, is that you weren't just focusing on the things that the strategies that the teachers could do to develop comprehension from a really kind of subject-specific pedagogical perspective. You were thinking about well-being at the same time, but tethered to a specific thing that they were trying to achieve in their learning, which was really interesting. I thought you were quite clever in that you saved the Estin thematic report until last. I felt like what you were trying to tell me there was that you'd looked at all these empirical studies and this sort of what we would call research with a big R that academics have done. And then you looked at the Estin thematic report, which, as you rightly said, looks at like a small case, about 13 schools, I think it was in total. Yeah. And they're looking at practice, aren't they? They're looking at classroom practice and they're looking at, what is having impact, from what they're seeing in schools. Was there a reason why you put that last, is what I'm getting at here?
So I was really on the fence about even including it because it wasn't a study. But I thought it's the most local research or most local guidance that I could find, and it's an important part of working in a school and teaching is making sure that we're meeting the standards we should be. So I wanted to put it at the end just to sort of so that the other research reinforced what was said by Estin and they worked together, rather than if I put it at the start, it's not the strongest research wise. But I really wanted to make it relevant to my practice and anyone else's practice who's reading it, to my for my lead practice school.
I thought this really set you apart as your own personal research skills. I thought it was very shrewd of you to be thinking critically about the validity of that source, but B, put it at the end so that you can look to see through the lens of the research, the robust research articles that you looked at before that, to kind of test the validity of Estin's judgments.
Yeah.
Did it sort of, throw into question anything that Estin had put in that report? I don't want to put you on the spot, but...
No, I think that anything that went... I left the Estin one until last because I'd, with the bulk of the writing, because I'd pulled out sort of bullet points. And then all of anything that Estin had said was all supported by the other research that I'd included in the other entries. So it really did actually help me to understand the Estin report itself and how to use Estin reports.
It's quite reassuring, really, as well.
Yeah, definitely.
That it was supported by what you found. And so, aside from what you've already told us, when it came to the crunch point and you had to put together your visually enhanced summary to present to school colleagues, what recommendations did you think for that particularly partnership school were going to be most pertinent to helping them move forward with this area of their practice?
So I recommended to teach vocabulary explicitly. I think that's something that can easily be sort of glossed over. I know that I did before I finished this research, and really break it down for the children, and then to do that throughout all ages, and for all abilities, and all children are able to use the evidence that I found and the recommendations to then further understand the texts. And then I also recommended, when choosing reading interventions, and this was mostly through the Estin report as well, including background knowledge and including reading strategies, but then also reviewing those regularly and assessing how well they actually work, doing that on a regular basis, and then high level questioning as well. I think that was a really big one that has changed my practice, is really thinking every time I'm asking a question and planning my questioning as well, ensuring that it's high level for all abilities.
Just backtracking just a tiny bit, when you talk about background knowledge, are you talking about the pupils having background knowledge of the text that they're trying to comprehend, or is that sort of topics that are coming up or things that are going to come through in the text that they need to know before they read it?
It could be all of those, any and all of them. It could be knowing a bit about the topic that the book is about, knowing some of the vocabulary and going through that and teaching that explicitly before actually reading the text, so that they are able to access the rest of the text. It could be lots of different factors. It could be the chapter, knowing that the children have read the chapter before and not when you're reading a novel, and discussing that, maybe just reminding them or getting them to remind you of what's happened, so that they're able to connect the two chapters in their minds.
Thank you for that. And, you know, we like to sort of ask our students who've gone through this whole process whilst training to be a teacher, you're developing your academic skills. Like, what did you personally get out of doing this assignment?
It's really affected how I teach, and until really it got towards the end and I was talking about the recommendations, and I was putting together the visually enhanced summary, I sort of looked back over the previous couple of weeks of teaching, and I can do the same now, look back, and I'm including a lot of these things. I'm teaching vocabulary explicitly. I'm breaking down the words, even in, you know, I'm in year 3 at the moment, so we do that in GGR most days. We'll break down words that we don't know. I'll have a look beforehand and see what the root of that, or what the etymology of that word is, if that helps, if that's going to help them understand it. It's loads of different ways that I've sort of just tweaked maybe how I teach, but it's made a huge impact, definitely.
Good to hear. And final question, Danielle, because you've given us so much there. For anybody about to embark on assignment 1 now, because these resources we hope are going to be useful to students in the future, any advice you would give them if they're about to begin?
I think just start reading early so that it's not overwhelming, because some of the research is so dense and full of really complicated language. That really helped me, and it made me feel like I wasn't panicking the last few weeks to keep reading. I was tweaking constantly the actual bulk of the essay. And then use your mentor as well, because they're so knowledgeable. They know the children in the class so well. They can guide you towards topics or specific research even. My mentor was she was really useful when I was writing my essay.
Really sage advice. Danielle, thank you very much. It was a pleasure and a privilege reading your work, and good luck with the rest of the course in assignment 2.
Thank you very much.